All right. Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another episode of the Health Detective Podcast by Functional Diagnostic Nutrition. My name is Evan Transu, aka Detective Ev, and I will be your host for today's show, episode number 355 of the Health Detective Podcast. We are moving right along. And if you have been a long-term listener, you definitely would remember this name because she was actually a guest on episode 189. And then recently we were emailing back and forth, and she's always doing new and cool things, always diving into the research. And so this is not only an update podcast, but just a reintroduction to these topics and getting to hear some of the latest science and things that are coming out regarding Parkinson's and many other topics. We got a lot to dive into today. So I will read our guest's bio and then we will get right into it. Before I do that, I forgot almost. If you guys are available October 17th to 19th, maybe you have some free days on your calendar, then you should consider going out to San Diego, California, where we are doing the closest thing to an FDN conference since 2019 pre-pandemic. Jeremy Maleka and Jen Maleka of BioCollective are hosting this conference out in San Diego, right on Mission Bay. It's going to be absolutely beautiful. And they're expecting, based on current sales, about 100 FDNs to be in attendance out of the 300 people total. So even if you're not an FDN, you certainly can go. But if you are, this is probably your best opportunity to ever see so many FDNs in one place again. I think the record outside of that, since our conferences are like the Cellcore conferences, they have usually 30 or 40 FDNs. But when I travel normally, it's maybe 10 if we're lucky. So to get 100 all in one place in Southern California, of all places, which is like the original home of FDN, is going to be amazing. And so podcast listeners actually get $200 off. So you go to Hicks-live.com and the code is HDP200. That's good until the end of the day on August 31st. So we only have a few more days left to be able to do that. If you guys can swing it, I know times are tough. Times are also very good in a sense, right? Some people are killing it online. Some people are still very much in the early stages of business, and I get that. But if you can swing it, I'd highly recommend getting the VIP ticket. One, selfishly, because I just want a bunch of FDNs to be on the private boat dinner that they're doing. But two, because it's cool. And you get a CGM and you get to do the private boat dinner around San Diego at sunset. It's going to be awesome. So I hope to see you there. That's Hicks-live.com, code HDP200 at checkout. Now for our guest today, Martha Carlin. She is a transformational leader who has leveraged her extensive business experience as a turnaround expert to become a leading citizen scientist in the field of the microbiome. With a focus on improving human health, Carlin founded the BioCollective, a company dedicated to studying the microbiome and its impact on human health. Through the BioCollective, she has conducted groundbreaking research on the gut microbiome and its relationship to diseases such as Parkinson's. Carlin also launched, and Martha, if you don't mind, I wanted to make sure I pronounce this right. Is it BiotiQuest or is it pronounced differently?
It's BiotiQuest. I have a strange thing where it's playing what you've said before on my screen. Like I can hear what you were saying earlier playing now. So I've never done a live thing and I don't know what's going
on. Is it affecting you overall from keeping going?
Yes, because it's basically louder than.
Are you still on your YouTube tab?
Maybe that's it. Oh, that's it.
Oh, quick thinking, Tracy. Thank you so much. You're awesome. Great.
Okay, good.
God bless.
Sorry about that.
All right, I'll finish this up and we'll get going here. Okay. So Carlin also launched the BiotiQuest brand of targeted probiotics, which offers targeted probiotics to restore lost microbiome function and restore balance. Her innovative approach has earned recognition from the National Institutes of Health and the White House Microbiome Initiative. I don't care who's in office. I am so glad that there's a White House microbiome initiative. That's awesome. Making her a key figure in the field of microbiome research. My friend, welcome back to the show. It's so good to have you again.
Thanks so much for having me back. I'm excited to be here.
All right. So if people want to hear the full story, especially with your husband, and I know that's going to overlap in today, that's fine. But I would recommend you guys go back to episode 189. Just search for Martha's name with the Health Detective Podcast and it'll come right up because we really dive more into the story there. Today, I want to stick mostly to the new information. But Martha, just because I know not everyone that's listening is going to go all the way back to episode 189, could we give to the degree that you'd like, a summarized version of what led you to getting into this? Because you didn't do it just because you were bored.
Sure. So I actually got into the field of science from a previous career in business operations and consulting after my husband got Parkinson's. And so I started teaching myself science and trying to understand Parkinson's from a systems perspective. And then in 2014, I read about the microbiome, which was a term I had never heard, and dove deeply into what it was, started making some investments and funding some research at the University of Chicago, which led me to found the BioCollective to start collecting people's poop and sequencing it so that we could start to connect the dots across many diseases, not just Parkinson's, and try to figure what's going on with our guts and figure out how to fix things.
And then just to connect this all together, so obviously something did happen with your husband, which I'm guessing is going better than not, because his name's Jack, right? So he must have been emailing us the other day. So I'm guessing things are moving in the right direction.
His name is John.
Oh, okay.
So Jack is our son, and Jack.
Okay, got it.
So, but yes, he is doing pretty well. He had a pretty severe case of COVID at the end of 2021, which created a number of major setbacks for him, which we have worked our way back from, and that has actually led to some of the discoveries and the information that I'm going to talk to you about today. So,
well, that's excellent to hear that he's doing overall well. And I apologize for getting the names wrong, because I actually I remember like little details from podcasts. I'm like, I know it starts with a J, so of course. But yeah, let's dive into this then, because I have some notes, of course, of where to start. But I feel like if I just let you go, there's probably going to be some magic that happens. So let's start with this question: what is the number one thing that you're excited to talk about today? Let's jump right into it.
So, the number one thing I wanted to talk to you is about endotoxins, which is a term probably not a lot of people are that familiar with. I mean, maybe your FDN crowd could potentially be familiar with it, but endotoxins are they're basically cell wall components of gram-negative bacteria, and they're highly inflammatory, but they've also been used as adjuvants for vaccines, and they are present in a lot of manufactured goods that are grown in, or molecules that are grown in recombinant E. coli, because E. coli is a producer of endotoxin. And so we actually did a clinical trial with one of our probiotics, and one of the clinical measures that we looked at was serum endotoxin. So we were doing a trial in diabetes. Well, it happens that endotoxin, serum LPS, or that's lipopolysaccharide, which is another name for endotoxin, is elevated as an inflammatory marker in diabetes. And so when we did our trial, we saw that it moved the dial significantly. And so I started looking into the literature on endotoxin and started seeing how many different animal models there are using endotoxin to drive disease, which was just kind of a mind blower for me. There were over 500 papers in Parkinson's disease using endotoxin to drive Parkinson's symptoms in an animal model, in a mouse model. And they use it in depression. They use it in diabetes. You could just go to PubMed and type endotoxin and a disease name, and I think your mind would be blown. And so along the way, I also was communicating with a scientist in Australia who's been doing some work, and this might be a taboo topic, so I want to be mindful, but people who have injuries from a certain
You're good.
Yeah. Okay. That over the last several years, and one of the things that they found in their research is that certain batches had a higher level of endotoxin, and there is there's a regulatory framework for ensuring testing and making sure that there is, not a high level of endotoxin and things that maybe wasn't followed in that process. So, I started just kind of connecting all of these dots to endotoxin. And, my mind was kind of blown because so many people are in a state of high inflammation. And this is one of the most inflammatory molecules in the body. So
instantly my head went to this because I do not think the average FDN is anywhere near as knowledgeable as you in this topic, but we would understand it. Like the first thing my mind connects is I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I remember learning about this in the course. I remember learning about how spore-based probiotics, for example, like the ones that come from Microbiome labs. One of the reasons that they are so powerful, it seems, is because they're good at helping to lessen the load of LPS. So that's why people start to feel better, it seems. And it's really interesting. I did not know that those were directly connected to things like depression, because I cannot tell you how many people I've seen take some of these products. And it's not, guys, this is not this simple. If you're really dealing with like severe depression or Parkinson's, it's not just take one product and everything's good to go. But I have seen people see improvements in their mood from this stuff. In fact, I'm one of those people, and I've done it enough times on and off where I cycle. I'm like, there is no way that this is not doing something. And so it's amazing. Now, what's interesting is I try to live a very healthy life. I know you try to live a very healthy life. All of our FDN community is doing that. And yet I still feel benefits from certain supplements and stuff. So that implies to me that, our environment's not necessarily in our favor right now, because even someone who's trying in America, at least, we do have a global audience. So I'll specify that America, not it, almost worse than every country out there, especially a lot of European ones. We have a different level of load. So that's kind of crazy that someone could be trying to do everything right and still feel this way. So I know you've studied a lot with glyphosate and other things. Like, are these chemicals and environmental toxins things that can act as endotoxins in our body? I hope I'm not misunderstanding that or asking a silly question, but I think you get what I'm getting at.
yeah, I don't think it's a silly question. I haven't looked at whether there is what's called molecular mimicry in the sequences of those. I want to say there may be someone who has looked in that, but what glyphosate does do is it selects for those more pathogenic microorganisms in your gut. And so what you're going to get, if and pretty much everybody in the United States, it doesn't matter how hard you are trying to be healthy, you're getting exposed to glyphosate some way in the food supply. Even on the organic side, we actually just were involved in a research study with Dr. Don Huber, who's one of the top experts around the globe in glyphosate. And I have an article coming out in the Weston Price Journal this quarter that's covering that research, looking at glyphosate and the binding of minerals that prevented organic sauerkraut from maintaining its structure. So it cost a company about $1 million. And then we started looking at all those mechanisms, and you can tie it into what's going on with collagen in our bones. And, now when you go to if you want to make your own chicken broth, if you get a chicken, sometimes the broth won't have a lot of collagen or gel to it. And that's also an indication of this glyphosate exposure. And in the cabbage study, basically the organic farmers use manure as a fertilizer, and that's approved. Conventional cattle manure and poultry manure is approved for use in organic crop growth, but that manure has glyphosate residues from the conventional feed that those animals. And so in 2020 and 2021, which was the year that had the major crop loss, there was a much higher level of glyphosate in the poultry manure than there had been previously. And the hypothesis was that they used more glyphosate at the end of harvest for desiccation to speed the process up, because they didn't have the labor because of COVID. So I don't know if that was the case, but all these things are interconnected, and back to the glyphosate, it does select for more pathogenic organisms that are producing these lipopolysaccharide endotoxins.
Okay. Well, it's a perfect connection, so thank you. And you made my perhaps silly question seem very astute, so I definitely
Yeah.
appreciate that. That's always good for the podcast host. So, going back to the endotoxin specifically, then you already listed off a few of the kind of causal things. So, is this one of those cases where it seems to me, at least, it's not that endotoxins in and of themselves are the worst in the world. It's more that we're accumulating so many in our body that it's leading to issues. So is it kind of one of those things where, yeah, we can handle a little bit of stress, but when we have this overload, that's what's really killing people here?
Yes. Well, actually, so endotoxin is often what kills people from sepsis. So they die. And if you're familiar with Wim Hof, the breathing
Yes.
guy, the deep water guy, one of the studies he did with his mental stuff was he actually allowed them to inject him with
Mhm.
endotoxin, and you know it didn't create any sort of inflammation in him, largely because he, has a superpower brain and body. But in most cases, like, it's very dangerous to do a study where you're injecting endotoxin in people is very dangerous because that can actually cause somebody to keel over like that if there's too much of a load.
I definitely read the watered down version of that because I was aware that he did something like that. I did not realize it was severe enough that in theory this could actually kill someone. The way that, again, I'm not saying it literally said this, but the way I perceived it at the time is, oh, okay, this guy injected himself with the equivalent of, a flu or cold and was able to fight it off. But I mean, and that would have already been cool, but that was a whole different level. I mean, I hope people actually research this stuff because I remember when I talked about him the first time to like family, it's not that they thought I was lying, they thought I heard wrong. I'm like, this guy holds multiple world records still. Like, this is not a
Yeah.
conspiracy theory. Like, he's well known. It's just he was doing a lot of this stuff before he was super popular. Some of his world records are long before, he had 100 something, 200 something thousand followers on Instagram or anything like that. I'm sure he's at
Right.
way more now. But this guy's been out there doing it, man. So very cool. What are some of the things then that those of us who are listening can do? Because, like I said, I'm doing everything that I can on a regular basis. I'm sure I'm not perfect, but man, I'm living better most likely than 95% plus of Americans in terms of how intentional I am about my health. So, what are some of the things that we can do then to lower this load when it comes to endotoxins, especially, I mean, if it's leading to things or contributing to things like
Right.
Parkinson's and depression, they're not particularly rare diseases.
Sure. So I mean, probiotics and fermented foods are definitely a a path to reducing endotoxin level. And you mentioned the spore forming bacteria in microbiome labs. We have our probiotics. All of our formulas contain a spore former.
Mhm.
We use Bacillus subtilis, and that may be one of the mechanisms, but the overall mechanism in our sugar shift formula is lowering glucose and fructose in the lower GI tract. So it's not feeding; it's more like a terrain shaping uh, formula. So then you stop feeding the pathogens, and you get a broader spectrum of healthy bacteria. But I'll tell you a a funny biohack that I learned from a scientist he's working with me on a new hypothesis about a major contributing factor to Parkinson's is so the bad guys are bacteria that can produce something called urease, and that urease then results in these little carbon dioxide bubbles that can kill the good bacteria that then result in the constipation that we see in Parkinson's, which is a very um, like very solid concrete like structure that is from potassium and calcium spilling
Mhm.
out of the good bacteria that have been killed by the bad bacteria. And we basically learned a biohack from him that these bacteria are very temperature sensitive. And so what we started doing with my husband is uh, having him put an ice pack on his stomach when he's eating and when he goes to bed at night. And essentially, when the stomach is, or that whole intestinal area is below 37C or 98, body temperature,
Sure.
basically, they won't produce urease. And so it's kind of a funny little biohack, but it's really made a significant difference with John. So, it could be as simple as changing the temperature. So I started to think, because there's also kind of a trend about cool pools and cold dipping and all that sort of stuff. And I wonder if, part of the magic of doing a cold shower or a cold dip was bad bacteria.
It's so funny that's exactly where my mind went because I've always been big into that. I will say, I paused it as of last year because it's a long story that I shared on here before, but I was exposed to black mold in an apartment my wife and I lived in, and we had no idea. And I was working from home more than ever before. And I started to get strange injuries during any type of stress, like physical activity, even the cold plunges. But prior to that, I had trained this for enough years that, like, my buddy and I, we were going out. It's 30 degrees outside, and we're going into the Delaware River where George Washington crossed, and we go
Whoa.
do 2 minutes. So it was fun. But my point in saying that is not just to try to sound cool. It's because I love that stuff, and I love circadian biology, like studying artificial light and what sunlight can do. And I'm kind of under the impression with both of those topics that we have, like, we know it's good. Everyone gets that. Yes, this is helping out. I mean, maybe someone under extreme stress or in a deep state of disease does not need to be cold plunging. Like, that could be more harm than good at the time. But generally speaking, people seem to benefit from these things. Certainly the circadian rhythm stuff, like, no one's going to get hurt by catching sunrise. And I kind of keep thinking, we're just scratching the surface on this stuff. Like, we have no idea why this is good. Like, let's use the common sense wisdom that, yes, humans were supposed to be exposed to a variety of temperatures. Humans were definitely supposed to be in natural light. Let's start there and continue studying to see exactly how this works. Cause it's like, it's fascinating. And to your point with your connection you just made, I'm like, yeah, I don't think we have any idea yet just how good this stuff is. Cause the results that some people get, I mean, are dramatic. I've seen multiple clients in their 20s. I won't use their names because they have not, I don't think they've shared this publicly. But multiple women in their 20s that had lost their period after getting off birth control. And I'm talking, some of them were for a year. I have them catch sunrise 20 minutes a day for 2 weeks straight. Literally all of them start having cycles again. And it's like, what? How can it be that significant that fast? So it's cool to see what's going to happen in the future with the science and the connections. Like, I love people like you that are like thinking a step ahead of what we're going to see later down the road.
Well, the sunrise thing is really interesting too, because in the kind of the debris of the long COVID stuff we were dealing with my husband, one of the things we actually started to look at was trying to reset the circadian clock, because he was up multiple times during the night. And so we actually started sleeping in our basement, which is very dark and doesn't have all the electromagnetics, but getting up in the morning and going out and just watching the sunrise, and at the end of the day going out and watching the sunset, or watching that sort of dusk, different frequency of light. And I think about, anytime I'm doing something, because I'm a microbiome person, I mean, it's signaling to us, but it's also signaling to the bacteria and fungi and everything that's in our bodies. And we're more microbial than we are human. And there are 300 times more genes from the bacteria in our body than the human genome. So, like, what's that sunlight doing, signaling the microbes
Yeah.
in our gut? So
Cool. I mean, I know we could do a whole podcast on that, so I won't get too deep into it. But
yeah.
to prove your point, though, you guys got to look this up. There's a study showing that they went to a tribe that does not really interact with the Western world, right? They don't have hospitals or anything. And they gave them candy bars to see the effects that the sugars and other chemicals would have on their gut microbiome. And then they did this with just average people like myself. And they found that those people were seemingly like unaffected from the crap that they were fed. And yet people like me, totally affected by it. And I could have told you that. I get affected by it if I ate it now. And the connection in the study was on the idea that the exposure to sunlight because red light does actually penetrate the skin quite deeply, especially near infrared, and we do know it can affect the gut microbiome. And they were basically saying that when you have this extra boost from the natural light, it's almost like protective or regulating, or regulatory, I should say, of the microbiome. I'm like, wow, just again, like how many little things are we missing in today's world where it's like, it sounds nice and cute. Yeah, go outside. It's healthy for you. It's like, no, that might be essential. That might be the first step you should be doing with some of this stuff.
Well, it's interesting too, because in the very early research we were doing sequencing the Parkinson's microbiome, one of the genes that popped up was a gene involved in photosynthesis. And, I will early in my about the microbiome and different organisms and what they do. And so I was talking to one of my expert scientists, co-founders, and I said, there's photosynthesis going on. And he goes, there's no light in the gut. And I was like, well, there's light that penetrates the body. Plus, bacteria actually produce light. There is bioluminescence, basically, what you see in the ocean. The same thing happens with organisms in the gut, and they do it. It's like when enough of them kind of come together, it's like, okay, they have a quorum sensing, and they say, okay, there's enough of us, and they start to produce light. So anyway, we're kind of going off on some crazy
I know.
stuff.
So I'll get us back, I promise. And hey,
Okay.
if I'm listening to this podcast right now, I'm not mad, that's for sure. There's a lot of great stuff being shared here.
Yeah.
So another thing I have in my notes to make sure that we got to review all the stuff that we wanted to update people with today. And forgive me if I'm pronouncing this wrong. Glycocalyx?
Glycocalyx.
Okay.
So the glycocalyx and endothelial surface layer is this it's a polymer, basically, and it's generally thought, it was originally thought to be lining the blood vessels, and the endothelial surface layer is this little hair-like structure, and it expands and contracts and allows things through or not through. And like, I think of it in terms of what's going on with the barrier at the gut, but I was very fortunate to get introduced to, I would say, one of the leading scientists in the world studying the glycocalyx, Dr. Barry Ninham from Australian National University, and have started to work with him on a kind of a new theory of what's going on in Parkinson's. And it also connects to the long COVID. And so that this glycocalyx is this protection, but it's allowing the gases, oxygen and nitrogen, to cross over into the blood, and then carbon dioxide to come back out. And we humans are supposed to be essentially the salt concentration of the ocean. I think he calls it 0.7 nanomoles, or I may not have that exactly right. But essentially, if that salt goes too low, you will get a collapse of the glycocalyx, and that causes all these other downstream problems, because you're not getting the gas flow. A lot of things aren't happening. And so this is kind of a really new concept for people. But one of the things that kind of led us to that, and also to the ice pack on the gut, was as we were trying to solve issues with what was going on with John, we could see this electrolyte swing going on. And he was taking electrolytes, trying to help with the electrolyte swing. But of course, if you take these megadose electrolytes, then you're swinging that salt concentration up and down, and not sort of keeping it in that sweet spot. So, it's a very new area of research, but I think is going to turn out to kind of turn a lot of our concepts upside down. And we're going to be coming out with a hypothesis paper, kind of explaining how it's working in Parkinson's, with this collapsing glycocalyx and endothelial surface layer. And that's also a lot of what was happening with people who had a very poor outcome in COVID.
Okay. See, and I like your objectivity with the COVID thing, because I know that you were talking about the, let's call it the treatment for COVID as well. But the reality is, guys, if you're trying to be even remotely objective, the bottom line is this: there are some people that did not take the treatment and got COVID and were very sick for a very long time afterwards, some still suffering. And similarly, I know people on the opposite end that they took the thing and that's when they got sick and have been sick for a very long time afterwards. I think there's a variety of reasons for that, perhaps even slightly different mechanisms, but the bottom line is this: those two things, it seems, are pretty major stressors on the body. And I think we had a society that's walking around like a bunch of ticking time bombs, that we can't handle any more stress. I couldn't handle the stress, 23 years ago, apparently now, because I was already symptomatic and getting sick. So all this other stuff doesn't help. So I appreciate your objectivity of saying, oh, well, this is why they might not have been able to handle the virus itself. People got sick with this. I hate the extremes on either end. I think the reality is it's a crappy situation and both things kind of sucked. And I would like for neither of to have been in my body personally.
Well, and it's interesting because I know people sort of across the spectrum, and there's definitely like almost, so like I look at oxidative stress in Parkinson's, like that's a big part of the problem. And it's this stacking of problems till you get to, the biggest problem of all, which, was this COVID virus. And, John didn't have a vaccine, but he had a very, very severe case of COVID. And there's also been some research coming out now that if you had very low bifidobacteria in your gut, so that's also, we do have 2 strains of bifidobacteria in our formulas. Low bifidobacteria, people had poor outcomes. And there's research also showing, Dr. Sabine Hazan has a paper showing that the vaccine specifically targeted bifidobacteria and killed the bifidobacteria. And so bifidobacteria are also very important for brain health. They produce something called plasmalogens, and those are very important for what's going on in the brain. And that's another new area of focus in Alzheimer's and related dementias, is this loss of plasmalogen production. So, it's all sort of interconnected, but a lot of it has to do with, how stressed your system was already.
Yeah. Well, good thing I don't know of any person ever that's reported a lessening of cognitive function after these things. I've never heard that symptom. So yeah, must be coincidence. With that said, guys, I see a lot of you on. So if you have any questions for Martha too, please feel free to drop them. This would be the time. She's obviously a wealth of information and knowledge. So please feel free to drop some questions. One other thing I want to talk about though, Martha, before we talk about the product line itself, I'd love to hear more about this and what you've worked on. I have one more note, and this is particularly interesting coming from you because I love the people who have such a mind for science, but then connect this. One thing that you've added that we didn't talk about last time is the spiritual side of, and even trauma side, of some of these disease states, I guess, particularly Parkinson's. So what have you now looked into or discovered since we last talked about how the spiritual side and trauma side can connect to people dealing with this condition?
Well, so initially, I just had some general observations about the people with Parkinson's that I've met literally hundreds of people with Parkinson's over the course of this 22 years and interview them. And I either learn about some kind of traumatic stress related event, a death, a divorce or something like that, a loss of a business or some kind of stressor there. But then if I dig even deeper, a little further back, there's just this kind of low grade sense of fear. And so when John had his long COVID and we were trying to address that, we actually had a integrative and functional medicine doctor recommended to us, Dr. Ben Edwards, who lives in Lubbock, Texas, and he also has a podcast. I don't know if you ever met him, but he's a fabulous guy. But so we went to see him, and he has 4 pillars, but one of the pillars is peace. And he's really focusing this year on peace. And I really started looking at that and looking at the connections to, so people with Parkinson's are in a constant state of fight or flight. So that state of fight or flight is affecting the neurochemicals in the body and the inability to relax and have peace. Well, if we kind of go to meditation or spirituality, or the relationship, your relationship with God, that is where peace comes from. Is that trust and relationship that you're going to be okay. And so like I just see the connections when I talk to people. And then we went and met with Dr. Ben, and that was one of the things he said to John is, this is an area that you really need to work on, and you need to work on that first. And what I have seen over the course of the time that we started to work on that and work on it together is kind of the miraculous improvements that come with the removal of the fears and the trauma, and recognizing when that emotion is locked up inside of you and starting to learn how to find the peace.
That's awesome. I mean, I know we could go into that deeper. We have a million podcasts on this show that talk about that, but I wanted to at least mention it today just because, again, getting to hear this first part of the podcast with how science-based you are and then connecting that all, I think it's validating for a different group of listeners. Because normally when people come on and talk about that, it's not that they don't like science, but they're the ones that are more naturally emotionally in tune, and they're talking about things more generally. I mean, I don't even know if you've realized this. You've referenced like probably 10 different doctors and studies combined so far. Like, it's just how you speak, you're very credible in that sense. So it's cool to know. And again, validating for many people to hear that, yes, this is a part of it. And I'll be dead honest. It's very rare that I talk to someone on this show, just anecdotes that I've picked up over 350 episodes. You don't usually find someone that's in a state of chronic illness that doesn't have a set of pretty clear circumstances that were quite unfavorable in their life. I'm not saying it's the only cause. I'm saying it seems to be a common mix that leads to these very adverse health outcomes. Because you kind of wonder, I mean, we're all living in the same world. I'm in an apartment complex right now with my wife. I'm going to watch these kids that are 3 years younger than me this weekend, and they'll be drinking till 4 a.m. and they're staying out and having fun and doing all that stuff. And they can wake up the next day and be fine. If I did that now at 28, I would feel like hell, right? So you kind of wonder, how can I do all this other stuff and not be able to do what they do? And genetics are a factor, sure. And just other things that you're susceptible to are a factor. But these adverse life events, I do think matter a lot. Pam commented here. Martha, great to see you on FDN, and really like the fact that you are addressing light and faith as core components to healing. Awesome. Well, I guess Pam knows you from somewhere else too. So thank you, Pam.
Well, so one of the scientific papers, well, there's a lot of scientific papers that connect but fear, there's a paper on fear. I wish I could think of the title of it right now. But we looked at it. I'm trained in the root cause protocol, so, very focused on iron and copper. But when you're in fear, a state of fear, it changes iron in the body and how iron is moving. And iron, of course, feeds pathogens, which again, sort of back in that loop. And then there's also, there's a researcher by the name of Dr. Mark Light, who was the father of a field called microbial endocrinology. And like our thoughts create a chemistry, a stress, that then feeds the microbes in the gut that then create more of those chemicals, where you get a vicious circle, where if you can like see the light, find the peace, you're not going to feed those negative bacteria, and you're going to have a better overall body terrain that's going to help you with that piece.
It's pretty hard to argue. Very cool. All right, let's talk about BiotiQuest specifically. And forgive me for this, but I guess it 189, that would have been approximately 2 years since we've really talked, I think. Was that a thing back then? Because I know that you had a company. Was it the same thing or was it something different?
Well, so the company is 9 years old. So
Okay.
I started out very much focused on the research and like making our platform a platform for all researchers around the globe. But researchers don't like to share with each other. And it really wasn't a great business model. But along the way, we started to see the common problems in people's guts. And I brought on board Dr. Raul Cano, who's a microbial ecologist and just a genius with understanding how microbes work together. And we started to build these formulas to kind of put back function. And the first one that we made, we actually just made to try for my husband to see how it helped him. And within a month, we could see his microbiome shifting back to a healthier profile. And we could see, physical changes in his walking and things like that. And so we eventually, during COVID, we stopped collecting poop because we were collecting whole samples with live organisms, and we just didn't want to put our team at risk of that anymore.
Sure.
And it, the whole world had changed a lot. And so we said, let's bring these products to market. And so we brought five. So Sugar Shift is the one I originally made for John, that we did a clinical trial in diabetes for that product with some great results. We have a publication out on that, and we have a microbiome publication that we're working on right now. And we have one for sleep that's called Simple Slumber. So it's a group of organisms that help facilitate the production of bacterial melatonin and tryptophan. Also has a little bit of tryptophan in it, but the microbes make it in your gut. We have one called Ideal Immunity that targets specific foodborne pathogens like Listeria and Salmonella and all of that. We have one for taking after you've taken antibiotics called Antibiotic Antidote that helps restore the terrain so that you can get back a broader, healthier microbiome after taking antibiotics. And we have one called Heart Centered that helps with cardiovascular health. It increases the production of CoQ10 in the gut and nitric oxide.
Wow, awesome. You guys can find this. We actually created a easy to remember link for you. So it's fdntraining.com/BiotiQuest. And we're going to put that below right now. Thank you, Tracy. And then if you are listening on the audio side after this releases, go check it out there. So that's quite a few products, obviously. Is there anything, and sorry, you probably said this, but I might have missed it just because of how it was listed off. Is there any of those things that you'd recommend just for even general use? Like maybe someone is not coming off antibiotics. They think their sleep's good. So they're like, hey, what could I use just as a maintenance or to stay healthy? What product would be good for that maybe?
So that is our Sugar Shift product. Even though we did a diabetes trial, it's a very just overall metabolic health. And it increases butyrate, which helps feed the cells that protective lining of the gut. It helps with energy. It also does bacterial melatonin, so it'll help a bit with your sleep as well. There's just a lot of just overall mechanisms from that formula that is really far beyond what we originally thought it was going to do that it does. And then, of course, it's going to keep that endotoxin level down and kind of keep you healthy from that perspective.
What are you working on next? Because I know that we've actually talked about a few things today, or have alluded to a few things rather. But you're just someone that I got this vibe last time and I get the same vibe right now. There is always something 5-10 steps ahead, and I'm always excited to hear what's next. So what's something that you're very proud of that's coming up?
So we're actually really excited to be, we're working with Dr. Tom Dow, he's actually a retired eye surgeon who started working on autoimmune disease and the connection to a number of autoimmune diseases and a mycobacteria. So Mycobacterium avium paratuberculosis, which is called MAP. Dr. Dow has done quite a bit of research there. And also has a probiotic organism that is effective at reducing MAP. At least they've shown it in cows. And what most people don't realize is a lot of our dairy cattle are infected with MAP. And so the milk has MAP in it. So then you're drinking it if you're, so I think that's why stopping dairy for a lot of people can have some really good benefits. But anyway, we're working on basically bringing Dr. Dow's probiotic formula to market. And then once we bring it to market as a gut health probiotic, he'll be doing some clinical trials and may do it as a medical food.
That's awesome. All right. So outside of BiotiQuest, where can people find you or keep up to date? I mean, again, you've referenced like a million studies today. I don't know if there's a place where people can find some of this stuff or just more about you personally.
So, okay, well, we have a blog on BiotiQuest where I write about some of these topics, but I also have a personal blog where I write about the Parkinson's stuff. And often the Parkinson's blog will have more detailed scientific studies about Parkinson's and the microbiome, and also alternative therapies. And then we have a BiotiQuest YouTube channel where we repost the podcast where I've talked about some of these topics, and we'll sometimes have the papers in the notes of the podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I got two more questions and then we'll let you go here. And if you guys have any last second questions, you can feel free to throw them in. Thank you, Pam, for participating with us. One of those questions is clearly your husband's been an amazing transformation, but I am just curious because normally how I word this, a lot of the people that come on work directly with clients. Your case is a little bit different. So I'm just curious if there's any interesting stories of transformation that you've experienced or heard from maybe people using your products or some of the stuff that you've shared with the world. And I don't want to put you on the spot. I just don't know if anything comes to mind right away. I just love to hear about something where someone took this stuff or took some of your advice and then found that they were in a much better state of health. Would we lose me or lose her? Tracy, can you message me real quick if I'm still on? Lost her. Okay. Well, that's about as good a time to end as you can imagine if you are going to cut out. Maybe I would have loved to hear the answer to that question, but that's about it. So guys, I will try to... Oh, is that her right now? Shoot. All right. I think that might be it for today's podcast. fdntraining.com/BiotiQuest. And then we will have other links in the show notes where you can find Martha's stuff. And thank you guys so much for being a part of this today. I'm upset that we didn't get to hear what her number one tip for health would be. But remember, you can go back to episode 189 and she did answer those questions there. So I apologize for the abrupt ending, but I kind of saw her Wi-Fi looked like it was going in and out while we were talking. That's the only one bad thing about these biohackers is they try to lower the EMF so much you can't keep them on live.